Welcome on another episode of Democracy Innovator Podcast, and our guest of today is Sonia Bussu. Thank you for your time, Sonia.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you.
And you are a professor at the University of Birmingham, and you're a professor in public...
Associate professor, I should say.
in public policy. And so, as a first question, I would like to ask you, what are you researching?
I'm interested in participatory democracy, and I study democratic innovations. Those spaces of participation that allow citizens to have a say on the policies that affect them. And I also use participatory research in my work, in my empirical work. And so I try to work with participants to co-create policies, but also to evaluate the process of the experience of participation with them. And recently in my new project called Inspire, which is funded by the European Union under Horizon Europe, we are also testing arts-based and creative methods to strengthen inclusion within these participatory spaces that often tend to attract the most resourceful citizens, let's say, and the groups whose voice and whose experiences are often at the margins of political, public and social life are often navigate many barriers even to access these new spaces of participation. And so we are trying to rethink participation from their perspective, co-designing these spaces with them and using a number of different creative methods that can perhaps help address some barriers along education, culture, language. So using arts to also embody and experiences and bring emotions into democratic spaces. So that's what I'm working on at the moment specifically. But generally, for the past 15 years, I've been really focusing on participatory democracy spaces of various kind. And I'm also very interested in social movements and how social movements use these spaces to advocate for a deeper social change. Yeah. I think that gives you a sort of overview of what I'm doing right now.
Absolutely. And do you have an example about the co-creation of policies or also the co-design of...
Yeah. So I've just concluded a participatory process under the Inspire project in the West Midlands. So working with young people in Birmingham. And we focused on youth employment policies. And we used something called legislative theatre. And this comes from the tradition of the theatre of the oppressed. We recruited these 15 young people, very young, between 14 and 17 years old, from diverse communities and from across the West Midlands. So we used our local networks of youth groups and something called the Young Combined Authority, which is an advisory body of young people to the West Midlands Combined Authority. So we recruited these 50 young people, and with the help of a legislative theatre facilitators, these young people created a play through improvisations and games that reflects their experience of trying to access equitable work experience, work placement, and getting the support they need to develop their careers and enter the labor market. And And so we, with legislative theatre, you really focus a lot on power, right? And intersectional exclusions. And a lot of these young people come from very diverse communities, and they might experience intersectional exclusions along race, gender, class. And so the play, which is very much based on improvisation, reflect their experience. And then for the event, we invite an audience of community members and a team of policymakers, a team of people that have, in this case, influence on youth employment policies, and that can help address some of the problems that the play identifies. And the play, by the way, although it's about very serious issues, also very funny. It really mocks the system. And the title is You're Fried, which is a play on word on You're Fired, and refers to the fact that the protagonist ends up working for a fast food, right? And experiencing really poor working conditions and low pay. And so what happens after the presentation, the performance of the play, the legislative theatre facilitators, and I worked with two fantastic young people that had been involved with me in another project and then trained to become facilitators themselves. But then, so what do? They invite the audience to identify problems and then step onto the stage in the scene to try and change the scenario, right? And so members of the audience, but also the policymakers in the room, effectively are entering the lives of these young people, right? And trying to change the scene to address the problem. And then there is a dialogue, right, between the audience, the policymakers, the young people, in trying to fine-tune these changes. And this sort of opens the way to a dialogue that ends up with an actual policy proposal, actually various policy proposals. And then the policymakers in the room have to think, okay, how can I translate these proposals into tangible change? And they have to make some commitments in front of everyone. And then there is a follow-up, right, where we bring together the young people and the policymakers. We look at what has been agreed on the night, and then a program of actions, right, is agreed. And then we follow up with them. Now, obviously, policymaking is very complex, and things don't always happen in a linear way. But it's like this becomes like the play, right, which is very visual, brings in emotion, and then sort of generate these feelings of empathy, right, and solidarity in a more immediate way than just by reading a report or some numbers, or just the exchange of rational arguments, right, that can be very exclusive here. Through play, game, improvisation, theatre, you're also challenging power dynamics between the young people and the policymakers, and it's the young people's and their experience that frames the whole debate and the whole deliberation. So that's the starting point, right? And then this becomes a catalyzer of ongoing dialogue, ideally. So what we're trying to do is not to think about these projects as one event, but really anchor it in the local civil society and link it to live policy agendas, so that it can, and this has happened. So now we're finding synergies at different level, at the municipal level, at the regional level, to enact some of these proposals. And groups of young people from the Young Combined Authority that I've just mentioned are also taking ownership, right, of what happens next. The young people that have been involved in the project are also involved in the actions that have been agreed. So yeah, this is all generating new ways of working. And it all started with a play. And so yes, and in Inspire, all the participatory processes are using things like pictures or performance lectures and games and play as a way of bringing in different groups, right, to look at specific policy issues. And so we're
I can imagine, but maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, that in an event like the one that you described, there could be maybe less polarization, because sometimes often there is, I don't know, one is left, the other one is right, and so they do not talk each other. Well, maybe in such an event it's different.
I think it's a way of imagine, like now we talk a lot about immigration, right? And there is a lot of polarization about immigration. It would be really like bringing on stage the experience of an immigrant trying to integrate in a new country, and that experience frames the deliberation. So community members, irrespective of their background, they have to, in a way, relate to these different experiences, like seeing the world from different perspectives, right? But in a more visual way. It's really about bringing in emotion and feelings, and like finding connections also through actual feelings of solidarity and empathy, right? That are perhaps this connection is perhaps more difficult to develop if you're just reading numbers, or if you're just living in a bubble online where you're not really understanding the experience of the groups that for different reasons you might be antagonizing, right? And so yes, it's a way of creating spaces of dialogue and connection, but not just using words. And there's a lot of talk about mini publics and citizen assemblies that are very much based on talk and exchange of rational arguments, and that work very well for some groups, but not for all. And I think what we're trying to do with bringing in the arts is really just not thinking about rational exchanges, but also emotions and the role that emotions play in democratic setting, the importance of empathizing with different experiences of life and of the world. And specifically, we want to really center the experience of those groups that are often the ones not heard for various reasons, that are kept at the margins and are often victimized, right? And through this process, the idea is that they also develop a better sense of agency and collective agency, right? And you move from individual, what might be perceived as individual weaknesses, to actually systemic oppressions, and then building collective agency to address these oppressions, right? So that's all. That's what the theater of the oppressed is based on. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Paulo Freire and the pedagogy of the oppressed. I really recommend if you haven't encountered it. But it's really about democracy as emancipatory education, right? And so that's the work we're doing. So centering experiences that are often marginalized, and using those experiences as catalyzer for dialogues with the wider community to co-create policies that can help us foster social justice. I think that's the intent of the project.
It's beautiful. I really like the approach. And yeah, a lot of time we forget about emotions, and we try to analyze the text, I don't know, logic fallacies and so on, but there is emotions text. I mean,
yeah, and I think like perhaps a mistake of liberal democracies that it can feel very technocratic, right? And I think that's also ushered in populistic reactions, and populism, particularly far-right populism, is very good at using emotions, although negative emotions, right? Like fear. And so I think we might need to engage more with emotion, but the positive emotions like hope and empathy and solidarities and all those feelings that make us, that connect us as human beings, right?
How do you think like a social movement can use, I mean, I don't know if technologies or maybe other kind of governance to, in a way that, that they can be heard?
I think social movements are already reclaiming a lot of these new democratic innovations, right? And there is also, like in the digital world, there has been a social movement-led reaction to the commercial social media, social networks, right, and social media platforms with civic tech. Right, and so there is a lot of exploration of how we can use digital democracy also to support this work. And I don't think that participation and democracy can only happen online. I think what I'm finding in my work that in person, like physical connection, is really important to create a sense of belonging, right? And I think because society are increasingly atomized, and particularly young people have been living online all their lives, and I think like having these spaces where we actually connect are incredibly important. Like the young people I work with, possibly, I think recognize the importance of connection and feeling heard by their peers as even greater than seeing the policy change and having the policymakers listening to them, which is also important. But it's like this connection, this sense of belonging, that is where they really develop their democratic skills as well, right? And I think online you can never fully create that. And so I use a lot civic tech, and I don't know if you are familiar with the platform, the CDIM. Yes, so we use the CDIM for our work to support the work that happens in person. And so, for instance, the policy proposals that we co-create through this theater improvisation and sort of theater-led dialogue are then added to the CDIM as a policy tracker, when we can track implementation of these proposals. And the idea is to make the whole process more visibly accountable, because the whole community and the young people can check this policy tracker, and each commitment is linked to specific organizations. So the idea is that things don't get lost or don't get lost as easily as they could otherwise. But it's very difficult to create critical mass in these civic tech platforms, right? Because no matter how great they are in terms of like helping more interactive participation of people, there's not many people there. And so what's happening is that the public sphere, whether social movements or individual citizens, we're all in commercial platforms. And it's very difficult to create a sort of a response to these commercial platforms where we have no control over the algorithm. gaps, right? And what we see and what we don't see. And there's such little transparency about how these communities are formed, right? And engineered sometimes in this bubble created by algorithms. And so that's problematic. And I think, but then it's very difficult to create a sort of publicly accountable platform that can build the same critical mass, right, as
Yeah.
the commercial platform. I don't know what your experience is in this respect, and if you use civic tech, and you probably, yeah.
I saw that there is I mean, build a platform nowadays, it's quite easy. Having the people using the platform
Exactly.
it's hard.
And I think everyone is building their platforms, but then we can't really create that critical mass there that can
Yeah.
make a difference, right? And
Maybe
yeah.
like instead of building everyone his own or her own individual platform, a collective effort to build I don't know if the platform or like something that can really compete with commercial social network that, as you said, are a sort of black
Yeah,
box in terms of algorithms.
exactly. Yeah,
And also, I mean, the aim of such a network is to um, to keep us sticked in front of the screen.
exactly. Exactly. And I think there is a place for civic tech and technology, but I don't see democracy only happening there, right? It's more like supporting and helping us continue the conversation. But I think we need to connect more in person. As I think that's what I find. That's where the magic happens, and the things develop through these new connections. Yeah,
But do you mean just like in person, or in person like with the help of some AI civic tech tool? Because I also, when you were talking, I also believe that the in person is really like where you can feel emotions.
yeah,
Also, like in a video call, you can feel more than just chatting.
yeah,
And I was thinking that maybe the future of civic tech tools should go in this direction. So where people interact with other people, but at the same time there is like I don't know, a system, a software that can help that people. I don't know, maybe um, what is at the moment, what could be like a normal political conversation between two people, then it also become like a sort of public conversation because that
yeah.
data is extracted and contribute to something
Oh,
bigger.
that's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, you'll have to happen in a transparent way, though, because yeah, uh, I, yeah, and in through platforms that have some sort of public accountability, because otherwise, of course, there is some room for manipulation of conversation, or how they're edited, or how they're presented, right? And but yes, definitely. I think there's a lot to explore, but the key is to create transparency around these processes. And so even the role of AI is very problematic right now, but simply because there is no democratic governance of AI, how it works, how it's developing. It's all in the eye, in the hands of private companies, right? Even the developmental models of AI. Um, it's beyond even the reach of universities, because they don't have the money to compete with the private sector, right? And attract the best brains, or even put in the money for the sort of computing power that is needed, right, for AI to function and to develop. And so that is very problematic. So I think all this technological development is fantastic and can support democracy only if there is also a democratic governance of this technology and accountability and transparency on how they're developing. And at the moment, we're so far away from that. I don't know if it's too late, but
I hope not.
yeah,
And it makes me think that is a sort of circle, because to have new ways of governance, AI can be helpful, but at the same time, AI as it is now is a sort of black box, and so
exactly.
it's a sort of circle.
Exactly. The fact that companies like OpenAI have got so much power over the development of technologies that have profound effects on all societies is so problematic, right? And now I think, for instance, in the UK, there is an agreement between the UK government and OpenAI for AI to enter all public services, and again, what impact will they have on the way the police works or on the way local government works? Because we have such little understanding of how AI actually works, right? And such little power on controlling how it develops. And we know already that there are so many entrenched biases because these models are designed by a very, very narrow demographics of people that enjoy certain intersectional privileges as well. So, it's very, very problematic. I think, it's going to be interesting times ahead. But I suppose that's why it's more important than ever to create spaces for people to connect and develop critical thinking skills, and collective agency and democratic capabilities, which at the moment, as a society, we don't really have.
Yeah, you define like interesting times. Usually it means like bad times, but
I think I read a lot of sci-fi, so I think
okay.
I've got a very dystopian perspective on
Yeah,
things.
because that is the thing. Like we could actually have like a very I would say just society, like in the future, using this technology to maybe, I don't know, distribute power so that also marginalized community can also have an impact. Or on the other side, we could also be like in a very dystopic world. I don't know, everyone on TikTok just not able to.
Exactly. It's the difference between the Star Trek world and the Black Mirror world, right? So, but we'll see. We'll see where we develop. But
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people working on positive innovations and democratic innovation. There's some fantastic work that the commons do, and also the civic tech commons as well, right? But there's still not the sort of critical mass, right? We still very. It's difficult to connect, and perhaps we should try and connect these experiences more and create spaces for cross pollination yes. I mean, there have been some exciting experiences of the municipalist waves, right? And the fearless city. I don't know if you've heard about them, but these are cities that really invest a lot in participatory governance and create connections between institution and social movements and prioritize social justice. And Barcelona was the sort of leading city of this network of so-called fearless cities, but they're all over the world. But then it's very difficult to sustain these networks. And I think there's also very little awareness of what these different cities and experiences are actually doing. There's very little media attention. So, it's difficult to sustain and keep the momentum on these alternative ways of understanding and governing societies, right? But there's also a lot of work. So
Yeah.
we
A
cannot.
lot of work that can be done also.
Exactly. And I think like there's all these small autonomous zones of resistance, right? And finding ways of connecting them is going to be more and more important, I think. Yeah.
And
I realized that you wanted to talk about assemblage. We haven't got there
yeah,
yet.
exactly. I wanted to ask you if this can be connected in some way to your paper.
I really think so, because assemblage gives us the lens, right, to look at democracy in all its dynamism and its fluidity, and it really refers. Assemblage theory comes from Deleuze and Guattari, right, two philosophers that in the 1980s published a thousand. Plato, and they basically define assemblages as these dynamic configurations of people, institutions, technology, spaces, and including non-human and material entities like objects, animals, or even the weather. And so all these elements come together to shape processes, right, to create these dynamic configurations that are called assemblages. And then I like this lens to look at democracy, because it also gives an opportunity to recognize its messiness and its fluidity. And so traditional views of democracy as system and often just institutional arrangements don't really reflect the sort of fluidity and relationality of democracy that is always in the making, right? Always in a state of becoming, and then. Obviously, assemblages are not inherently democratic. They can also reproduce inequality. But what makes an assemblage democratic is its orientation towards freedom, equality, and inclusion, and its openness to transformation. And so I find it useful the way Deleuze and Guattari talk about power, and yes, and how that can relate to the work I do. And recently I also co-edited a special issue on democratic assemblage with Hans Asenbaum, where I really recommend it if you're interested in this lens, because there's some fascinating papers that also look at a statue as a catalyzer for democratic encounters, or even snow, right? It's quite interesting, and I think it broadens our understanding of democratic practices, and I like the way power is also understood in assemblages as distributed agencies, so as emerging from the interaction among these different components, human and non-human. And for example, within a digital platform or within a public space. So yeah, there's a lot of terminology linked to assemblage, but what it can help us really reflect on is this push and pull dynamics, because assemblages are shaped by tensions between, for instance, in democratic assemblages, grassroots activism and institutional control, between openness and closure, between empowerment and cooptation. And so I think an assemblage lens gives us an opportunity to zoom in and look at where there are spaces for change, right, through these interactions. So I think the sort of assemblage perspective is also what is informing the way we're looking at the participatory processes using co-design and co-creation that we are implementing under the Inspire project. So I think like we're still testing whether and how it works as an analytical lens, but also as a normative theory of democracy, particularly when it complements critical democracy. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with critical democratic theory, but I think there's a lot of synergy with assemblage. It aligns closely, like this emphasis on fluidity, contingency, relationality. So, for instance, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of fugitive democracy by Sheldon Huling.
Not really.
So, fugitive democracy describes democracy, like real democracy, as episodic, transient, emergent, right? And so it arises at a moment of through moments of collective actions and resistance, but often outside formal institutions. But it is also precarious because it's constantly under threat from co-optation. And so this conceptualization of democracy really values pluralism, disruptions, and radical transformation. And these qualities really resonates with assemblage emphasis on what Deleuze and Guattari called deterritorialization. So Deleuze and Guattari talk about territorialization, deterritorialization, and reterritorialization, right? To understand how change happens, right? And so territorialization stabilizes an assemblage. So it will reinforce existing norms, existing hierarchies. Deterritorialization disrupts these norms and opens space for change and democratic possibilities. And reterritorialization then occurs when innovations are absorbed back into the existing power structures. And so this potentially neutralizes that transformative potential, right? And these push and pull dynamics are at play the whole time. And so Deleuze and Guattari have this metaphor, this heuristic of molar versus molecular desire, always in tension. So the molar desire is like that kind of power that supports stability and control. So bureaucratic norms, for instance, or neoliberalism in terms of how we understand the relationship between the economy and politics. And molecular desire actually drives creativity and disruption. And that often comes from grassroots movement or social movements, right? And so this dynamics between molar and molecular shows that power in democratic assemblages is continuously contested and relational and emergent. So it's never really static or centralized. And so that's why I find it very useful as a lens to understand, this relationship and to really think about democratic innovations and how they relate to civil society and social movements, but also to centers of decision-making power in institutions.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was overwhelming because it's a lot to take in with assemblage, and I'm still trying to navigate the work of Deleuze and Guattari. But
it's super interesting also the way how power can be conceived in different ways, because the lens we use to conceive power, it's also changed how we use power. And so power can be hierarchical, collective, or like in this case also including animals, plants, and so on. So it's very interesting.
I think like there's one thing like there's this I think one of the critiques, the big critiques against assemblage theory is this idea of flat ontology, right? So treating all entities as equally agentic. And this has been criticized because people say, well, you're obscuring power asymmetries by claiming this flat ontology. Because then you're saying that, I don't know, like a tree will have the same power as a human being. But it's not what assemblage tries to do. And I think we can highlight that better when we combine assemblage with critical democratic theory. And then you can reorient it towards normative goal like justice, equity, and ecological sensitivity. Because actually what assemblage does is it challenges anthropocentrism, right? Because by recognizing non-human agency is challenging the anthropocentric lens that we use to understand the world and to make it, right? And
Yeah.
he encourages responsibility, right? That's a concept that Donna Haraway introduced it. And this is the ethical responsiveness to others that we have. So we do have a responsibility, but not just towards other humans, also towards the non-human. And so that's the way I think sometimes that latentology and the distributed power has been misunderstood in assemblage, but it's not about taking responsibilities away from humans, because we do have responsibility, but actually recognizing the agency of the non-human world, and so making our the way we even think about democracy and we build democratic institution less anthropocentric. And I think anthropocentrism has led to climate change, right? And a lot of other things that have used nature as a backdrop for all human actions, but actually this is not sustainable, right? So
It made me think, I don't know if you have read it, The Mushroom at the End of the World from Anat Singh.
yeah,
Okay.
that's true. Yeah,
Because the mushroom Matsutake that lives in symbiosis with the pine.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so I will stay here for another hour talking about this, but I think you
Maybe
have
we
to
should
go.
have a podcast number 2 to continue the
Yeah,
conversation. But yes, but I think, yeah, it's been really lovely. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, always happy to continue to explore these ideas.
thank you a lot, Sonia.
Thank you.